Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. You can catch up with us right now. We're streaming on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So you can put some faces to these names, these magnificent people I'm going to be talking to today. And of course, at Santita J is my Twitter handle, or should I say, is it X now, formerly known as Twitter. Join me over there. And I'm streaming on the Santita Jackson Show, the Santita Jackson and Friends, page. That's my Facebook page. Everybody, I keep getting requests to friend you on Santita Jackson. I can't take any friends there. In fact, they're kicking people off. I hate that they do that, but they do have a limit. If you would go to Santita Jackson and Friends, we can all be together. That is where I'm active. So please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page where you'll meet thousands of people. It's really great. And I thank you for helping us to grow and grow and grow. So please stream us right now. And let's have a conversation about foreign military aid. Foreign military aid. And we're going to be talking about, yes, the Trump trial. Can he receive a fair trial? More and more of the jurors are being kicked off. And this is probably at this time the most famous man on earth. And the media, for good and for ill, have shaped our impressions of him. And in this instance, one has to wonder if he can receive a fair trial, whether you like him or not. We're all innocent until we're proven guilty, and we all deserve that. But is it possible? What can we learn about our system in this moment? So that's in the second hour. But right now, let's talk about this $95 billion. That's right. Let me say it slowly. $95 billion with a B dollar foreign aid package. $61 billion to Ukraine. $61 billion to Ukraine. $26 billion to Israel. $8 billion to Taiwan and other countries. Can you imagine what America could do with that money? Think about it, everybody. $95 billion. And I can't wait for you to explain how they played a game with one of these, with some of this package where this money can be forgiven. And we cannot get student loan forgiveness in the United States of America. It's unbelievable. And of course, we have Attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant civil libertarian from the National Conference of Black Lawyers and great civil rights lawyer. And we have got Mike Ferner, one of the great patriots. And that's, we have to reclaim that, Mike. We really do. Veterans for Peace. Great, great patriot. And I thank God for you. And I'm so glad that we're all working together. And Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. I have to thank you for your article today. Speaker Johnson unveils $95 billion foreign military aid bills. And you said, that's what I do. But I don't take it for granted. Because what you did was analyze what these foreign aid, military aid bills contain. And the conditions, I think that's what's stunning. You made me dig and go to a few other articles and wait a minute. Some of these can be completely forgiven, billions of dollars. And yet, our American young people are suffering. They're not able to marry, buy homes, really start their lives because getting an education is unforgivable. It's unbelievable.
Unforgivable.
So it's unforgivable. But if you want to be at war, clearly you can be forgiven. So talk to me, Dave DeCamp. $95 billion. It's almost an inconceivable sum.
Yeah. It is. And, this is about as bad as I think it could get when it comes to the spending on these foreign wars. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's just getting worse and worse. And I want to talk about Ukraine because you mentioned this way that they're trying to fool us with some loans here. Mm-hmm. So the big chunk of this $95 billion is $61 billion for Ukraine to fuel this proxy war against Russia, because that is what this is. And if you look at the situation in Ukraine right now, we have seen reports after reports saying that Ukraine's front lines are at risk of collapsing. Basically, wherever they think Russia focuses its offensive, they're gonna be able to push through. They have manpower shortages, weapon shortages. They're expanding conscription laws. The people that volunteered in the early days of the war are still stuck out there on the front lines. It's a completely desperate situation. The U.S. has admitted that Russia's military is actually bigger and stronger now than it was before the invasion. And one of the U.S. goals in this war was to weaken Russia. That's something that the Secretary of Defense said outright. So that has failed. They've failed to help Ukraine regain any territory. So there's that, and that's what they're throwing $61 billion towards, is this failed effort. And you see the logic is, we have to build up, give Ukraine good leverage for negotiations. But the longer this thing goes on right now, Russia has the upper hand completely. They're going to keep losing leverage. And so there's a lot to say about that. But getting into the funding, so I'm glad you mentioned the loans, because this is something, fortunately, there are some Republicans who have been good on this issue of the war in Ukraine, but Mike Johnson, the new House Speaker, is not one of them. I mean, when he came in, he basically said, getting Israel and Ukraine aid was a priority for him. And he just met with Trump recently, another person who, we think might be a little better than Biden on this particular war. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really seem like it, because he essentially gave Johnson the blessing to put these bills forward. And they talked about, we'll give them loans, so they have to pay it back. But if you actually look at it, according to the reports that I read, that I based my story on, they don't actually expect Ukraine to pay it back. It says it there. And the source told CNN that was involved in these negotiations that the administration will have the power to forgive the loan.
Let's stay right there for a second. Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can change the conditions. That's part of the caveat, right? That they have the power to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't get an executive order on voting rights, on police reform. I can't get my student loans forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
But we can forgive. Help me with that.
Well, what? Another thing that might make you angry is this aid. This is the economic aid, what they call direct budgetary aid. That goes to the Ukrainian government. That pays for pensions, for government services in Ukraine, for all. It subsidizes small businesses in Ukraine, and so these are the things that are being paid for with this aid. The things that you might want to be paid for at home is being paid for in Ukraine completely. They don't have to pay it back.
Why? What is the strategic significance of Ukraine? I'm trying to figure it out. Most Americans cannot find Ukraine on a map. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we can now because we've seen enough of it. But Russia, lower left-hand corner. But that having been said, why is $61 billion, $26 billion to Israel? Just help me. I don't understand what's going on here. It just seems like it's like the spending has exploded, Dave DeCamp.
I mean, there's a lot of theories we could get into of why. I think sometimes a simple explanation is really the truth. And I mean, this has been a total boondoggle for all the defense companies, for Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and look at who's in the Biden administration, who's running this policy. It's Lloyd Austin. And what was his job before he came into the Pentagon? He was on the board of Raytheon. I mean, it's like this. There's always been kind of this, what they call the revolving door in the Pentagon. You'll have officials work in the Pentagon and then go work on, be a board member for one of these companies. But now, and this really started under Trump with Mattis. I think he was at General Dynamics. Mm-hmm. He went from General Dynamics to head the Pentagon. And then when he was done in the Pentagon, he went right back to General Dynamics. So it's just corruption, I think, blatant corruption. And this is, again, they're pouring weapons in. So a lot of this $61 billion is actually money to replenish the U.S. stockpiles that they've sent to Ukraine. So it's money for the military industrial complex.
Mm-hmm. So the money's really coming back to Raytheon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Some of it is.
At least some of it is. I mean, we're paying to I guess we're subsidizing Ukraine.
Mhm. So they keep fighting this, so people keep getting killed in this horrific war. And, of course, there's other reasons, geopolitical, trying to bog Russia down, which I think it's more hubris than anything that they think they
Mhm.
could do that. But yeah, I'm sure, and then we could get into the Israel aid and just the atrocities that we're supporting there. And there's just
Well,
a
no,
lot.
let's get into that
Mhm.
because we thought it was everyone. The talking point is $3.4 billion, and then you look and you say, wait a minute, $26 billion. Where is this coming from? You know, help me. How, where did because these are two separate bills, right? That are being pulled together, and
Yeah.
it was $26 billion.
Well, there was a big $95 billion bill that passed through the
Hmm.
Senate, and then Johnson basically separated them into three bills, just to
Okay.
have separate votes. And the Israel one is 26 billion. That includes 9 billion for humanitarian aid. They say some of that's going to go to Gaza, some of it's going to go to Ukraine. I think there's even some for Sudan in there. And they included that because the Democrats said that they would back this plan only if it included, everything that Biden's bill, the bill that Biden wanted did. So that leaves what's 26 minus 9, $17 billion. It's all military aid to support this slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, and also to refill Israel's air defenses because of the Iranian attack, which was a response to Israel bombing Iran's embassy in Damascus. So, and Israel gets 3.8 billion a year, so it's all on top of that. And this is a reason why, as Americans, we have to be opposing these atrocities in Gaza because it's our government, it's our tax dollars that are funding and enabling it.
Do you think that we have a real sense of how much money we're spending on these foreign wars? And then help me to understand what $95 billion could help us do here.
Mhm. I mean, it's a tough number to really fathom what that could do here. Um, but and when it comes to the true cost, you see the president requests the annual military budget each year. This year, it's almost $900 billion for all the military spending.
Yeah.
But if you look at the real number, you factor in, the intelligence agencies, you factor in veterans care, and the veteran affairs. And there's a great analyst, defense analyst, Winslow Wheeler, who always puts this together every year. And his estimate is basically it's nearly $2 trillion now a year on basically maintaining the empire. So it's just a astronomical figure, and the debt keeps growing, and printing all this money makes inflation worse. It's just we don't win. This empire is not helping ordinary Americans by any means. If anything, the ones that are in the military are going to suffer from this. If there is a big war with Iran, I mean, Americans are going to die. American troops are going to die.
And
So we have no.
American troops will die in other places because of the resentment that the global South has about what they see as the great imperialist power of the world, which is the United States. I mean, to
Mm,
me, it endangers our troops all over the world because I don't think we understand how we are resented. And people, the average person on the ground in these other countries do not. Our global brothers and sisters, they don't hate Americans. They don't like the policies. So they don't ordinarily take things out on troops unless they're put in a position of occupying. And increasingly, it seems like the Philippines, they want us out, Dave.
mm.
I mean, more and more of these countries, African countries, want us out. And we're saying, like, Jennifer Holiday and Dreamgirls, and I'm telling you, I'm not going. And this is not good.
Mhm. Well, there's actually a story on antiwar.com today. There was just a whistleblower, Niger. There
Yeah.
was a coup, and they basically ordered the US to leave, and they're not leaving, and they're kind of pretending like they didn't get an order to leave. So a whistleblower, Air Force senior airman, came out and sent a letter to Congress and said, "Hey, we're sitting ducks here. This is basically saying that they're in danger because they're in a country where they're not welcome." I mean, it's completely insane. And it's because they don't want to give up a big drone base that they have there in Niger. But so that's one example of putting troops in direct danger just to maintain these occupations.
Where do you see this going? I mean, because you hear when you listen to the corporate media, they are basically cheerleaders for this war. I mean, or for this package. Aren't you going to get it through? And of course, the the big bear is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, interestingly enough, I'm like, I think she's got a point. We got to stop this. This is, you said you were not going to fund all of this. We need some money in other places. I don't reflexively disagree with people. I try to listen to what they're saying, and I might not agree with, shall I say, the path that you've taken or your not political space you occupy. But like when Rand Paul says, wait a minute, when he asks certain questions, I'm like, you got a point. I don't agree with you on a whole lot of other stuff. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you got a point. I don't agree with you on a lot of other stuff, but I agree with this because this is money we can ill afford to spend. I mean, Americans are really struggling, Dave DeCamp. And when you see this is an astronomical figure. And then when you add in a factor of 10, really 20, and go to $2 trillion, what are we doing? What is all of this for, Dave?
Well, I mean, it's a big question, but I would say, this is, I think we're going in a very bad direction, that this global empire that the US has is going to eventually collapse. You have kind of the rise of the BRICS countries, which is, the US is totally to blame, has itself to blame for kind of driving Russia and China together. I mean, and Iran, what are these countries going to do? They're getting sanctioned by the US. They could trade with each other and create this alternate economic system. So I think it would take time, but eventually, if the hegemony of the US dollar is really threatened, then the US empire is in trouble. And it's not going to be a good end if we just keep going in this direction, unless we try to mitigate, try to have some sense here and rein in this stuff.
It's hubris, as you said a little earlier, because we think that it can't happen. And Dr. King warned us more than 50 years ago. He said, a little country, if you do not tamp down this arrogance, change your arrogant ways, there's going to be a little country that will rise up and you won't even know their name. And they will take the legs out from underneath us. And those are the BRICS countries. The people who were colonized are now getting more powerful than the colonizers. It's amazing. Stay right there, Dave DeCamp. Mike Fern of Veterans for Peace and attorney Mark Fancher. I want you to respond to what you've heard. But Mike, in your remarks, I want you to talk about the call by Veterans for Peace. Once again, you're calling out President Biden for criminal violations of federal law by shipping weapons to Israel. When you hear $26 billion with a B, they're not listening to you, or maybe they're ignoring you. I don't know. What do you when you hear $26 billion?
When I hear $26 billion, I ran a few numbers for a statement we put out very recently on that for tax day. And Veterans for Peace office is in Missouri. And the taxpayers in Missouri last year sent the Pentagon $13.6 billion. That would have paid for 133,000 registered nurses. Now, you talk about people dying overseas. Our policies are killing a lot of people overseas, but they're obviously killing a lot of people right here. I'm sure the health and life and happiness of people in Missouri would have been a lot better served by 133,000 registered nurses than the money they sent to the military. And, these numbers are, as Dave said, they're incomprehensible, but just, to say, the cost of the nationalpriorities.org has a running total. The care for the veterans of the war on terror, just that, veterans of the war on terror, $3.6 trillion. The interest on the war debt, every hour taxpayers in the United States pay $9.25 million for interest on the war debt. That's been $1.2 trillion. The total cost of the war on terror, $10 trillion. So, and why, you asked earlier, why is this happening? It's because, as I've mentioned on your show before, Santita, the madmen arsonists are running the government. These are the people who profit by the way things are going, the Boeings and the Raytheons and so forth, and their stooges in Congress and the White House. These madmen arsonists say, here's what our foreign policy is going to be, because this is how we can make the most money. And away we go. Some of those profits from those arms sales come back to the companies and they reinvest them in Congress, and on and on and on. So, that's one of the things that we need to address, is not just working against lobbying, demonstrating against whatever the latest spending bill is, but to take some time and take a look at how we can change the rules of the game so that these madmen arsonists are not the ones running the government. That's a long-term issue, but it can be done. And there's Veterans for Peace is starting to work with Move to Amend to change the Constitution, to get constitutional protections taken away from corporations, so they no longer have any First Amendment right to lobby, to advertise, to write legislation, to do any of the First Amendment things that they're now doing, because they say First Amendment rights, you can't stop us. And right now they're right. But until we figure out that we're going to, our movement and the people that we work with, until we figure out that we're going to put some time and attention and energy into dealing with the roots of the question, these spending bills are going to keep coming faster and faster. And like Dave was saying, the empire is going to collapse, and maybe for the planet that might be a good thing, but it's going to take a lot of people down with it, and it doesn't have to be that way. So,
I mean, all of these nurses, and when you see, we just came through this pandemic, and you saw in the hospitals, you saw the people just all over the emergency rooms, but in a nation of 330 to 350 million people, we don't even have 1 million hospital beds.
Yep.
We
got plenty of aircraft carriers, though.
Oh yeah. What did my father say? Well, does anyone need to buy a bomb? Oh, okay. Do you need to go to the doctor? Well, now there's your answer.
Yeah.
I mean, our priorities are way, way off. Attorney Mark Fancher, $61 billion to Ukraine. We'll never see that money. $26 billion to Israel, $8 billion to Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that part of the success of empire depends upon creating illusions to ensure delusion on the part of the masses of people. And I think that we continue to have a delusion. We think that there are multiple parties involved, that we as ordinary people and taxpayers pay money to our government, and then our government gives the money to other countries' governments for purposes of quote unquote aid. And I don't think any of that is true. Basically, what you have is you have a global empire that is dominated primarily by US based corporations and wealthy families and individuals. And basically, what they do is they take the money from us and keep it. This is not aid that's going anywhere. They just keep the money. They make it look like they're giving it to somebody, but they're not giving it to Ukraine. They're not giving it to the government of Ukraine. What they're doing is they're giving it to Raytheon or to Boeing or to any of these defense contractors, and that's them. I mean, they're giving it to themselves so that they can enrich themselves, and then they're leveraging it because what they do is they use this for destructive purposes to wipe out entire, regions, territories, so that they can give themselves some more of our money to go back in and rebuild it, as part of disaster capitalism, so that the more destruction, the better. You spend more money on weapons to destroy things, and then you spend even more money to go back and rebuild stuff so that you can destroy it again. And I think that the reasons for it are not very complicated. Mainly, it is that imperialists generally are not thinking about the future. They're not thinking about tomorrow because they only care about their immediate needs and wants and greed. And so whatever it takes to accomplish their objective of getting as much money as they can right here and now, that's what they're focused on. And as part of that, they're ignoring to their detriment, the script that has been written historically about the fate of empires. And they're following it to a T as they continue to expand and to send resources and money to other parts of the world in order to wreak havoc and cause destruction. They take away the money that's needed in order to sustain and maintain the domestic front and the infrastructure of their home base. And once they fail to do that, then that collapses, and then they have nothing to work with anymore. The empire collapses. And so I think I think that both of my comrades here are exactly correct. That the empire is fated to collapse. It will collapse. And while I think that Mike Ferner is right, that if it does, it can cause a lot of pain and death for innocent people. But I think that it doesn't have to if we are clear on the fact that we don't have to be held hostage by the delusion that's been imposed on us that the United States of America as an entity constrains and confines us, that this is all that we have and that we have to fight to preserve this, that really we are more, we fit better into the framework of analysis that Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party came up when he came up with this idea of revolutionary intercommunalism. That really the people that we and the community that we belong to is a global community. There are more people than just us who are the victims of the empire. You know, they're all over the world. And in the same way that the empire has its community of powerful corporations and people and interests around the world, we have our global community. And that's who we need to be in league with. And I think that other segments of our global community are probably a little bit more conscious and aware than we are about what it takes to survive this. You know, reference was made to the practice in recent times of Niger and other countries telling the imperialist powers to get out, you know, take your military and get out, leave. I think we need to do that too. We need to basically say, we're no longer a part of you. We have nothing to do with you anymore. And we need to think strategically about how we can integrate, you know, ourselves into the politics and the economies of global forces and global communities, so that we're no longer dependent upon what the so-called U.S. government is prepared to provide for us in the way of survival and maintaining some sense of you know, a life that is livable.
Do you think that we, because when you travel around the world, people of oppression and people of struggle, people who really are looking for freedom and will not rest, they look at the Black community in the United States. They look at the indigenous community. They look at people who lived under the boot of oppression, and they really do find common cause with us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Historically, they have, but that's eroded a bit because the empire has been very clever. You know, they bring out a Barack Obama, they bring out a Lloyd Austin, they bring out the woman in the UN, Greenfield.
Linda Greenfield.
Yeah, they bring out all of these people who are become the face of imperialism, and it creates a certain amount of confusion around the world about to what extent is the Black community really in the same situation as we are. I think that we've been very blessed that there have been major events which have been very potent reminders to the rest of the world of what our real conditions are. When Katrina hit and the world saw what happened to people there, and they said, wow, they look just like us. They're suffering in the same way that we are. It was terrible. It was a terrible tragedy for the people who had to deal with Katrina, But on another level, it was a great advantage to us in terms of global solidarity. When George Floyd was murdered, it caused people to say, oh, yeah, we remember these people, and the fact that they're dealing with an empire too, and they're right in the belly of the beast. So you have these things that happen that serve as reminders, but we can't rely on those things. I think we have to continue to be very actively engaged at the grassroots with people around the world. And like I don't think it's just the Black community either, because I think that unfortunately the MAGA crowd has created a misperception of who white workers are and what their interests are, in other parts of the world. I think they look in other parts of the world, they say, well, white workers in America are crazy. And a lot of them are, let's not kid ourselves. But many of them are also very confused. And then there are many who are not even part of that, who could also be potential allies. And then you've got all these other communities here too. There's great potential, but we just have to recognize that we're not part of the empire. We have to withdraw from it. And it can be done. I think that for those of us who are people of faith, we saw Jesus and the first Christians do it. I mean, they had to deal with the Roman Empire. And when push came to shove and they said, well, what do we do about our situation relative to the Roman Empire? They basically said, we're not part of it. We will sustain ourselves. We come together as community. We will support each other. We will live independent of the empire. We will create our own reality and go a different direction. And I think that's what we really have to do.
Yeah, good point.
Mike, why did that resonate with you?
Well, because the way we think of ourselves and the way we perceive ourselves in the world is such a powerful thing, and a lot of people have, just for whatever reason, have not really considered that. The bars to the prison are in our own minds, and I think that's what at least part of what Mark was saying is that we need to define what humanity is all about and what kind of life we're going to have, and not rely on it to be defined for us. I think that's part of saying we're going to go our own way. We're going to create our own reality. We're going to determine the things that we think make a good life and somehow band together to get it. Now, I know that's, kind of way up there in the sky at this point, but those are the kinds of things that we need to keep in mind, or we're never going to get there.
Well, I mean, who is it? Jeff Bezos said that visiting the world, visiting Earth one day will be like visiting Disneyland. These people are already planning, quote, to colonize space, to show you how off their thinking is. They're still thinking imperialistically.
Yeah,
beyond Earth.
They should. Well, those guys were up in space. We should have passed a re-entry tax of 50% of their net worth before they could come back.
You know what? You wrote this, Dave DeCamp. I don't know what I'm going to do with Mike Furner, Veterans for Peace. Everybody will just love it. Over $8 billion will go towards spending in the Asia Pacific to prepare for a future war with China.
Bullshit.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We're on air, but I'm sure they caught it. It's all good. But no, I hear you. I mean, but why do you call balderdash to that? Well, and then Dave DeCamp, that's the report.
Because it's just Mark said the empire creates illusions so that we can live in a world of delusions, and that's exactly what's going on here. There's no more interest on the part of Taiwan and China to go to war over their relationship. It's just stuff and nonsense, as they used to say long ago, and it's ridiculous. The merchants of death and the madmen arsonists that are running this place have got to have a boogeyman, because if you don't have a boogeyman to scare people, how are you going to extract these exorbitant funds from their pockets when they need it for something else? So we create this boogeyman. We say, China is going to do this, that, and the other thing. China has got maybe 12 bases, military bases outside of their country. We've got 750. You know, who's the aggressor in this situation? You know, we've ringed China with military bases all over the place, on and on and on. So it's ridiculous. But if we don't take the time to figure out what's going on, and I'll just end with this. So many people thought history started with February 22nd, 2 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine. They thought history started on October 7th, when Hamas decided they were going to do what they could against Israel. You know, if that's how you view history, and I think a lot of people I know, that's how they look at it, and so they just justify everything that happens after that. They don't have any historical context. So,
well, I mean, what about this? I don't know how you have a future war, Dave DeCamp, Mike Ferner, and attorney Mark Fancher, with your creditor.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You know, they hold our debt.
So,
I mean, like we're gonna beat our chest with China. I'm like, but they're the bankers. Hey,
so just before I forget it, I want to say Mark made a really good point earlier when he said the reconstruction. That's like the big price. You know, that's got the really big price tag on it. And when it comes to Ukraine, you see all these companies, these American corporations, you know, BlackRock executives going over there and making deals to rebuild Ukraine. I think the World Bank has said that the estimate is like $500 billion that it's going to cost. So yeah, that's very much a part of this.
That's before the overruns. That's before the overruns.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you know, rebuilding these countries to, you know, with all these corporations. I mean, it's just such big money. And then with the $8 billion for Taiwan, and they say, you know, there's some other spending for the region there. This is a big deal because this includes military aid for Taiwan. And so since 1979, that was the year that the U.S. cut off diplomatic relations with Taiwan to open up with China. That was the normalization deal. Since then, the U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan. There's an argument to be made from China's perspective that the U.S. committed to ending weapon sales to Taiwan, which they kind of did, but they use very vague diplomatic language. But anyway, so they've always sold them weapons, but last year they started giving them military aid, which, you know, either means that they're sending them weapons free of charge or they're financing the deals. So this is a big kind of escalation in U.S. support for Taiwan, and China's not happy about it. And we've seen a lot of this in recent years. The U.S. very involved in the South China Sea right now. So the reason why I use the language that this spending is to prepare for war with China is because that's what they're saying. That's what U.S. military officials are saying they're doing, is preparing. You know, they say, oh, we want to deter war, but if one breaks out, we have to be ready to fight and win. And I mean, as you have, you know, mentioned, there's so many reasons why the U.S. and China can't go to war. The economic relationship being a big one, the fact that China has nukes, and they're preparing, you know, openly saying that they're preparing for a direct war here with China, which is different than what's happening with Russia. So it's just really crazy. And if you ever watch any of the hearings in Congress, any of these things on China, you talk about creating illusions and narratives. I mean, it's completely unhinged when you see these members of Congress talking about China. I mean, it's like they're all pretty much lockstep. The only people I've seen really speak out about it is like Rand Paul and I think Bernie Sanders like wrote something about it, you know, a warning about the Cold War with China, but that's it. I mean, really, and like it's really concerning. It's just they're lockstep in this march toward war with China. When again, there's so many reasons why it can't or shouldn't happen, but that's what they're talking about, you know, and that's why I try to make a point of covering it. In the South China Sea, we've seen the Philippines and these Chinese boats get into all these encounters in the South China Sea. In the South China Sea, and the U.S. is telling China, because we have a mutual defense treaty with China, that they're saying that it applies to these Philippine boats. So they're threatening to go to war with China over this maritime dispute, over like reefs and rocks, you know, 7,000 miles on the other side of the world. So you mentioned,
what is the population of China? What's that, like
the population?
Yeah, like
I think it's, what is it, 1.3 billion or maybe a little less? I know India just overtook them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they've got us by like a factor of 4. I mean,
I know.
I just, if this is just like really uh,
And the
the
fight that they're talking about is on their coast. They're talking about fighting them over Taiwan. I mean, that's like China fighting us over Cuba. It's like and the war games show, for some reason, whenever the U.S. these think tanks do war games about a battle over Taiwan, they never include nuclear weapons in their calculation. But the war games show that if there was like a battle between the U.S. and China over Taiwan in like the first couple weeks, like tens of thousands of American sailors would be killed because they have missiles that could take out a ton of our ships and bases in the region. So I mean, again, there's just so many reasons why this is just a completely insane thing to prepare for. And when you have Taiwan, the main opposition party is all about easing tensions with China. You have the ruling party is more about closer ties with the U.S. and the West. But if you look at the polls in Taiwan, the overwhelming majority of people want the status quo, which means that they don't want, formal independence and they don't want to, China to take over. So it's just people don't want war.
Well, I mean, help me because you talked about 3 bills and you said Speaker Johnson has a 4th bill.
Yeah.
What is that about?
So
it seems like all this stuff is like being, Mike Ferner and Attorney Mark Fancher. So much stuff is tucked up underneath. I mean, my brother's in Congress now, and he said somebody called me about some vote and need your brother. And I said, whoa, I don't do that with my brother. My brother is one person. The congressman, somebody else. I can get you in touch with someone, but I just purposefully. My brother's my brother, and he's my baby brother at that. Are you joking? I'm like, I kind of leave him in that space. But he said, let me tell you something. And I worked on the Hill when I was in college, too. He said, do you know how many iterations of one bill you will get? And they send them to you all through the day. He said, sometimes I can't even wipe my eyes enough. I'm like this, like, didn't you just send me this? And they tuck something up in there that changes the whole thing, that gets a significant chunk of your constituents very angry. But it's all of this. There's just so much dishonesty in the process. So what is this 4th bill? I mean, it's just something else that no one's talking about. But you are.
Yeah, so this bill, he's saying, it's in the name of national security, and it includes a TikTok ban, which even though the House just passed some kind of TikTok ban bill, but this is part of the, the overreach we'll see with this new like Cold War with China is, the claim is that TikTok is like a Chinese spy tool, which there's never been any evidence to back that up. But they're trying to ban that, or they're trying to get them to sell it to an American company. And if they don't do that, then they'll ban it. So it includes that. And it also includes this bill to give the federal government basically the power to sell off frozen Russian assets that the U.S. has to give to Ukraine, which would essentially be stealing Russia's money. We have like $67 billion in frozen Russian central bank funds. It's held by the U.S. Federal Reserve. And we talk about the collapse of the empire and like, the de-dollarization. If the U.S. starts doing that's going to erode the trust even more in kind of this global, U.S.-led global financial system. So it's just another mess of a piece of legislation.
I mean, the arrogance is just, but it shouldn't be. It's not shocking, Mark Fancher, but it's like, when will we learn? It just does not stop. How are you going to steal someone's money? Because we hold the monies of so many people as if that can't happen to us, Mark, someday.
Yeah. There, to a certain extent, those who are in charge of the empire are incorrigible, and I don't know that they would ever reform themselves anyway or be reformed. I think they just have to be eliminated personally. I don't mean physically, but
Unalive. You mean we need to change, as they used to say years ago, land changes hands. Things have to.
Yeah, but if, just hypothetically, if they wanted to avoid all of these tensions that they have, all of these so-called wars that they need to fight, all of these continuing needs that they have for defense spending and other things, if hypothetically they wanted to deal with that effectively. It's a real simple solution, and that is that when you have enemies, uh, make friends with them. The fact is that the United States, with all of its resources and all of its assets, if it wanted to, could be the greatest force for good in the history of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talked about how resources are diverted away from the needs of people in this country, and the infrastructure needs and the healthcare needs and the education needs and all of those things. It's all diverted. Uh, Without even talking about that, think about what the world would be like if the United States presented itself as a genuine friend of the rest of the world and
Mm-hmm.
looked at the needs of the rest of the world. And when we came up with real aid packages, they were focused on meeting human needs of people, real people around the world. We would have no enemies. We would be seen in the way that the United States always has projected itself through Voice of America and other things. But we would be a force for good, a force for life, a force for health, a force for education, a force for the collective brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. I mean, those are things that we could be, but we can't because there's too much money to be made by just being evil. And the people who are committed to being evil are the ones that control the empire. So they got to go.
Okay, Mike Ferner, I think you almost became a Black Baptist right there, or at least a Southern Baptist. I saw that hand going. I saw it go. I almost saw you almost move. So why
Yeah.
did that resonate with you?
Well, it resonates with me because years ago I went with a delegation of Veterans for Peace through Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras. And we spent 2 or 3 weeks going through those countries and visiting with all kinds of people and seeing lots of the country. And we would be in a van driving from one little town to the next for whatever the next meeting was with a priest or some kind of institution. And along the way, you could see these tiny little villages, hamlets. You'd see the conditions that people were living in. The fact that they, for the most part, didn't have clean water, didn't have any sewage systems, none of that. And you think of how little that would take. I mean, it's nothing to our budgets to provide those kinds of places. Instead, what we do is we fund the death squads in Guatemala and El Salvador that make life a living hell for people. The economy gets to the point where, another generation later, people are leaving, and gee, guess who shows up on our southern border? And how in the world did they get there, and why did they leave their homes in the first place? And then you go through these countries like we did, and there's, in a small town on the coast, there's a little port there, and there's all these different facilities, rest areas, little market stalls, and little malls and things. And they say right there, built with the generosity of the people of Finland, built with the generosity of the people of, fill in the blank, over and over and over again. And our money goes to the death squad. So, what Mark was saying is absolutely right. People in this country have no idea how disliked and outright hated we are. And for very good reason, frankly. It's a shame.
And what the people who have been most hated in this country, who've met the most resistance, they're the people who garner us the respect around the world. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
Huey Newton, Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, people aren't stupid.
People are stupid. Well, my brother who's on the Foreign Relations Committee, he said, as I travel, he said, they'll give these credentials, when they introduce each of us. He said, and the last thing they say about me is that I'm the son of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And everybody goes, oh, wow. And this is not about our father. It's about the footprint. It's about carrying out, Dr. King gave him an assignment and pulled him out of his seminary, his seminary training, a semester before he got his master's in divinity, which he did go and finish. But it's about that tradition, nonviolent resistance, saying no to militarism and racism and classism and all. I mean, just saying yes to a just and peaceful world. So when people come to me, Dave DeCamp, and say, "Oh, Reverend Jackson made a black president impossible," I said that was not the idea. It was, you wanted to break that phenotypic barrier for sure, because that's a ceiling that should not be on the dream of any child of color. And you should have a woman on the ticket. He's the first top tier candidate to push for that. That's why you got Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket, because of his advocacy. But this isn't about browning up or femming up imperialism. It's about ending it. We can't be sustained. I mean, to your point, Mark, and to your point, Mike Furner, Veterans for Peace, Mark from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. My mother said, what would this world look like if America was known for being the place where you could go and get well? If you had a Mayo Clinic in every city and town and hamlet, like you have a doctor on every corner in Cuba. That's what they do. They export doctors there. I mean, Dave DeCamp, boy, I love reading antiwar.com because you keep me on point. In this last minute, what do you want us to know as we look at them trying to really ramming through this, $95 billion, but that's really $2 trillion that Americans so desperately need?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, this stuff that we're talking about, it's a shame because the U.S. uses basically humanitarian aid in a political way, in a way to maintain control in all these countries, as a way to influence and fund opposition to governments that they don't like. So I think I'm of the same mind that this federal government is beyond reform, and it really should just be abolished. And I believe in decentralization and all things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But while we're still here, I think the important thing to do is to just voice our opposition to what is happening here. Bother your representatives. It might seem like a pointless endeavor, but I think it's easy to do. One thing with Biden, all this pressure from Democrats over Gaza, I think if you have a Democratic representative or senator, bother them, call them, email them, once a week, just keep it up. And so, yeah, and I mean, it's unfortunate that it seems like no matter who's coming in, in 2024 in November, it's like all sides. You got Trump, Biden, RFK Jr. They're all super pro Israel.
Ooh.
So that's a shame. But I think just kind of we just got to keep kind of voicing our opposition to all this stuff.
And know that it's embedded in the Constitution that you are supposed to do that. Mm-hmm. Whatever the founding fathers and mothers, they were human. So I don't need to say that they were flawed. They were human. We all have them. We all do. But part of the genius of that Constitution is that they said, if this does not work, you must improve it. And if necessary, you must start again. They did say that. And because they knew that they were not perfect, and they knew that the world would change, and the world continues to change. And I think that we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of that. Everybody get registered to vote, please. And call your representatives on the local, county, state, and federal levels. Remember, the system works when you work it. Far too few of us work the system. The oligarchs work it. The rest of us get worked by it. Don't let that happen. Let's talk in the next hour about, oh my goodness. There's so much to discuss today. We're going to talk about what just happened. The Trump jury was impaneled. And I have studiously avoided talking about Trump, because a lot of the discussion is distracting. But the point that we are going to be taking today is looking at the impartiality of juries. I mean, how can you have a fair trial in America? It's not just about him. It's really about you. So let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, antiwar.com. Everybody give them your support. They support you. They do. And Veterans for Peace, they support you. Support them, please. Veteransforpeace.org and the National Conference of Black Lawyers, they stand for us. And I thank you, Mark Finch, for all the work that you and this whole magnificent panel that you do and that you have done and that you will continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the second hour of the Santita